All right, hey everyone, let's jump into another deep dive. You guys are prepping for the UPSC exam. This topic today, it's a big one. It could show up in both prelims and mains, so we got to get this one down.
Definitely.
Uttarakhand, yeah, they went ahead and implemented the Uniform Civil Code, the UCC, and we're going to specifically focus on how this impacts live-in relationships.
It's pretty interesting to see how Uttarakhand is kind of going against the global trend here. Usually when countries start regulating relationships that aren't traditional marriages, it's to give them more rights. Things like inheritance property rights, even healthcare.
Like they're trying to make things fairer for everyone, right?
Exactly, leveling the playing field a bit, but with Uttarakhand's take on the UCC, it seems like they're more focused on control than recognition.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. The UCC states that all opposite-sex live-in relationships need to be registered. And here's the catch. If you don't register within a month of moving in together, guess what? It's considered a crime. You could get in legal trouble. So at first glance, it might seem like they're trying to protect people with this law, right?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, honestly. On one hand, the law does try to protect vulnerable individuals, particularly women and children.
Right.
For example, children born within live-in relationships are now legally recognized, gives them the same rights as children born within marriages. And there are also provisions for maintenance financial support if one partner is abandoned.
So it's sort of trying to create a safety net, especially for women who might be dependent on their partners financially. But here's where I get a bit confused. What happens when a relationship just ends? Not because of abandonment, but just because things don't work out anymore.
That's one of the weaker points of this law. It's very focused on abandonment, but doesn't really offer clear guidance for financial support or splitting property when a relationship just fizzles out.
So one person could end up in a tough spot financially, even if they were the main earner during the relationship. Doesn't really align with the whole protection idea, does it?
It does raise some questions about what the law is really trying to achieve. Is it about protecting individuals, or is it more about pushing a specific set of moral values?
Interesting. And, while we're talking about specifics, let's talk about how the UCC actually defines live-in relationship. Because in real life, these relationships can be so diverse, right?
Definitely.
You have short-term things, long-term partnerships where finances are separate, and couples who don't fit into those traditional gender roles at all. Trying to squeeze all that into one legal definition seems like it'll get messy.
It does get messy, and the UCC actually borrows its definition from the Domestic Violence Act. It calls live-in relationships in the nature of marriage. But that's super vague, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And then there's that 1-month registration deadline. I mean, live-in relationships usually develop gradually, right? There's not a clear start date like a wedding. So this deadline doesn't really fit with how these relationships actually work.
I can see how that could make people feel pressured, like, oh no, we've been living together for 3 weeks, got to rush to the registrar before we become criminals. Doesn't exactly scream freedom and autonomy, does it?
Not really. And speaking of autonomy, things get even more complicated when we look at how the UCC handles relationships where someone is under 21.
Yeah, especially when it comes to privacy.
Right, exactly. If one or both partners are under 21, the law says their parents or guardians have to be told.
Wow.
Now, this might seem like it's meant to protect young people,
Right.
but it completely ignores their right to make their own decisions and have privacy.
Absolutely. This is a massive concern, especially for young adults in intercaste or interreligious relationships where their families might not be supportive. Forcing them to tell their parents could put them at risk of serious problems, coercion, even violence.
You're right. This provision ignores the fact that families can be really complicated. There can be power imbalances and dangers, especially when someone goes against social norms. It's almost like the law is trying to scare young adults into only having relationships that fit traditional expectations.
It's like they're saying, don't even think about stepping outside the lines. It's like they're saying, stay in line or else. And then there's the whole police involvement thing. I mean, why does the local police have to get involved in registering live-in relationships?
Right.
It makes it seem like we're treating it like a crime instead of a personal choice.
Yeah, it really sends the message that the government gets to decide which relationships are okay and which ones aren't. Like they're saying, we're the ones who decide what's legitimate.
It's giving very much Big Brother is watching you vibes. And honestly, it feels like Uttarakhand missed a real opportunity here. Instead of focusing on restrictions, they could have used the UCC to support people in live-in relationships.
I agree completely. If you look at what's happening globally, many countries are starting to recognize different kinds of partnerships. And they're doing it by giving them more rights, not by putting limits on them.
Exactly. Things like inheritance rights, joint property ownership, access to health care, and Social Security benefits. In many places, live-in partners already have equal access to all of that, Uttarakhand could have used the UCC to close that gap and create a fairer system.
Absolutely. Had Uttarakhand's UCC focused on making sure individuals in live-in relationships have the same legal protections and benefits as married couples, it would have been a truly groundbreaking move. They could have been a role model for the entire country.
It would have sent a powerful message that all relationships are valued regardless of whether they fit the traditional mold. But instead, this version of the UCC feels like a step backwards. It's holding on to old ideas instead of reflecting how Indian society is changing.
And that's the real problem here. By choosing control over empowerment, the law might end up alienating the very people it's supposed to be helping. People might be afraid to register their relationships because they're worried about what society will think or what their families will do or even legal consequences. It's a lot to worry about.
You're right. This approach could actually make things worse, pushing these relationships further into secrecy. And then when people need help and support, it becomes even harder to find.
Exactly. And, for our listeners who are studying for the UPSC, this whole situation is a prime example of how a seemingly straightforward current event can bring up complex questions about social change, legal developments, and that tricky balance between individual freedoms and the role of the government.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it looks on the surface, is it?
Not at all. It's crucial to look at these issues from different angles, considering both the intended and unintended consequences. You need to be able to break things down like this to succeed in the UPSC.
Absolutely. So let's do a quick recap of the main points from our deep dive into Uttarakhand's UCC. The laws have meant to provide some legal protection for those in live-in relationships.
Right.
But there are some serious concerns about individual freedom's privacy, on the possibility of the government overstepping its boundaries. Things like mandatory registration, the parental notification clauses, and the criminalization of noncompliance all erode the principles of personal choice and autonomy.
They do. And instead of creating an environment that's inclusive and supportive of the law, risks creating an atmosphere of fear and scrutiny. This could make individuals even more vulnerable to societal pressures and family conflicts. It's a missed opportunity to truly empower people and acknowledge the diverse range of relationships that exist today, something we see happening in many other parts of the world.
A missed opportunity for sure, and everyone, this deep dive is based on reporting for The Hindu, so be sure to check out the full article for more information. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue, so leave a comment below. Do you think Uttarakhand's UCC strikes a good balance between protection and personal freedom? What about the potential consequences, both good and bad? Let's get a discussion go.
And hey, if you're finding these deep dives helpful for your UPSC prep, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you click that notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily discussions on important current events. Understanding these complex issues is key for success in the UPSC, whether you're aiming for the prelims or the mains.
Now, as we wrap up our analysis of the UCC, let's take a step back and consider the bigger picture. What are the potential long-term effects of this approach?
That's a great question. The UCC brings up some fundamental questions about the government's role in personal relationships. If we want to protect people, is it better to put restrictions on them or to give them the tools to make their own informed choices?
Exactly. And how will this law affect social norms and attitudes towards live-in relationships in the future? Will it lead to greater acceptance, or will it further marginalize those who choose to live outside of traditional marriage? Lots to think about.
It is, and as aspiring UPSC candidates, you need to go beyond simply knowing the facts. It's essential to analyze, critique, and develop your own well-informed opinions. This ability to think critically and engage with complex issues will be incredibly valuable, not just for the UPSC, but for your future careers as well.
Okay, let's do that. So if we're thinking like UPSC examiners here, what are some of the big things we should be focusing on with this law?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is the whole intent versus impact thing. On paper, it looks like this law is all about protecting people in live-in relationships.
Right.
But does it really do that, or does it create a bunch of new problems? Like, think about the pressure from society, the chance of families meddling in people's lives. And what if this law just ends up pushing these relationships further underground?
It's like they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, forcing this one-size-fits-all approach onto something as complex and fluid as relationships.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point, how relationships are changing in India. Live-in relationships are becoming more and more common. It's a reflection of shifting social norms and individual choices.
Right.
So the question is, does this law recognize those changes and adapt to them? Or is it stuck in the past trying to impose an outdated model on a society that's moving forward?
It definitely feels like the law is out of touch with the realities of modern India, and it makes you wonder, could this actually backfire and make things harder for the people it's supposed to be helping?
It's a valid concern. Think about the potential impact on marginalized groups, especially those in intercaste or interreligious relationships. Could this law be used to further marginalize them, making it even tougher for them to freely choose their partners? These are serious questions that you, as future policymakers and administrators, will need to address.
It really highlights how even laws with good intentions can have unexpected and sometimes harmful consequences. And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC, this whole debate around the UCC really emphasizes the importance of balancing individual rights with social norms. It's about creating laws that are both effective and respectful of people's freedoms.
Exactly. It's so important to analyze these issues from different perspectives. Don't just memorize the facts, break them down, question them, and form your own well-informed opinions. That ability to think critically and engage with these complex topics will be incredibly valuable throughout your UPSC journey and your careers.
Remember, the UPSC is not just about memorization. It's about understanding the nuances, the complexities, the interconnectedness of all these issues facing our society. It's about seeing the big picture.
Absolutely. So as you continue studying, keep those broader questions in mind. Think about the intent, the impact, the intended and unintended consequences. And most importantly, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep working towards making a positive impact.
Couldn't have said it better myself. A huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into Uttarakhand's UCC. We hope you found this discussion insightful and helpful for your UPSC prep. And remember, you can find more information in the original article from The Hindu.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more daily deep dives into current events. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. We'll be back tomorrow with another topic that's sure to be on the UPSC's radar. Until then, keep those brains buzzing. 6 DP8.